Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad Mike Rodak is here, fellow staff writer at Bama 247. We are both back home now. Me in Tuscaloosa, Mike in Birmingham. Busy couple weeks for me. Busy weekend last weekend in LA for the both of us, watching Alabama go to the Final Four for the first time in school history. A win over North Carolina in the Sweet 16, and then a win over Clemson in the Elite Eight. The NCAA National Quarterfinal round is sending this Crimson Tide team where no Crimson Tide team has ever gone before. Mike, we're going to discuss that as well as their Final Four matchup coming up against top-seeded UConn. But first, I wanted to circle back because we started the last show talking about our brackets. I wanted to start this show talking about our brackets because our Final Four picks, based on the Final Four picks that we put in our VIP roundtable before the tournament even started, you and I both only picked one correct Final Four team.
Did I have Purdue losing? Oh, you're right. Okay. Yeah, I had Purdue losing to Kentucky, I think.
You had a big SEC bias.
That's a big L. I mean, I had Tennessee going to the Final Four. I mean, they were close.
I put Tennessee in the title game. So that one, that Purdue kind of helped me lose both of my bracket pools, which is, par for the course for a wrestling fan, right?
For me, I had Purdue losing to Tennessee, which is a close game on Sunday. I had Duke losing to Kentucky. At least I had Duke in the Elite Eight. I didn't have NC State, but who the hell had NC State in the Elite Eight? Who had NC State in the Final Four?
I forget who it is right off the top of my head. Wouldn't want to name him anyway, but there is somebody in one of the bracket pools that I'm playing in that at least put NC State in the Elite Eight. So some people knew. I, for one, did not. I only had 3 correct out of the Elite Eight. I had UConn. I had UConn over Iowa State. Iowa State lost to Illinois. I had Arizona over UNC. Obviously, Alabama and Clemson ruined that. I had Tennessee over Purdue. Again, a close game. And I also put Houston in the Final Four. I had them beating Marquette. I had them beating Kentucky. Mm-hmm. But, Jamal Shead gets hurt and Duke takes advantage. But nobody can seem to stop NC State at the moment. So none of it really at all mattered. But yeah, we rough pick 'em. But and we'll circle to this later in the show. The one team we did pick is the one team that Alabama is going to play up next in the Final Four. That's top-seeded UConn. Before we get there, wanted to circle back to this past weekend. Similar to what we did with the last show, kind of wanted to, not psychoanalyze, but just kind of quick look back reaction about how Alabama was able to navigate both the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. First time in school history, they're headed to the Final Four. Beat UNC 89-87 in the Sweet 16 last Thursday night. Then on Saturday night, revenge game over Clemson, 89-82 in the Elite Eight. Clemson beat Alabama 85-77, I believe it was at Coleman Coliseum back in November. This time the Tide get revenge, headed to the Final Four. Instant reactions, Mike. You were there with me in person to watch both games. What was kind of your initial big picture takeaways? If you had any big picture takeaways, or maybe it was more smaller takeaways from both of the games, what kind of stood out to you about how the Tide were able to do this?
Yeah, I mean, we went into the NCAA tournament saying Alabama needs to play better defense if they want to go further. And that was true. And they have. We also went into the Sweet 16. I think Nate Oates even said it, they need to play better on offense because they didn't play very well on offense kind of at the end of the regular season and also in the Grand Canyon game. And it wasn't as if Alabama played consistently great, perfect defense these last 2 games. It wasn't as if they played consistently great offense. They played really well on offense, but they did enough of both to get where they are. And, it wasn't like you look at the 4 games and how they won them, there's not a lot of commonality. I mean, it was 4 pretty distinct games. Even within the North Carolina game, there's 2 pretty distinct halves in how they played in each half. So it's kind of that ability to pull the right levers at the right time and have the right things moving at the right time. And they did that. Again, it wasn't just the offense. It wasn't just the defense. It was kind of the right combination of things. And it was a lot of guys stepping up as well that They needed someone to win the Grand Canyon game when they fell behind. Well, there's Mo Diabate. They needed someone to win the North Carolina game when they were behind. Well, there's Grant Nelson. They needed someone to win the Clemson game. Well, there's Jaron Stevenson. And I mean, Riley Griffin played well really in all 3 or 4 of those games with Trelly out. So just the combination. It's not like one player. It's not like this was Mark Sears's tournament. I mean, he was the MVP of the West region, but it wasn't like he necessarily carried his team on his back. Like, he did a lot of great things, but there's other players that in key moments were making the shots and playing defense and doing the things they needed to do. So that's what you need to do if you want to go to a Final Four. And that's what they did. And it's surprising to anybody that watched this team the last 3-4 weeks of the season. And I know injuries were a factor, but injuries weren't the only factor with this team at the end. And there was some games this year where they fell behind and just sort of, kind of looked like they just kind of gave up a little bit. And that's something that Nate Oates was mad about, the effort and all that. So there was no issues with effort. There was a sense of urgency. They fell behind in some of these games and they came back each time. There was that sequence in the Clemson game pretty late on where you had the back-to-back threes, answering the threes from Gerard on the other end. And that's what you need to do, kind of withstand those runs and withstand the adversity, as players like to say.
Yeah, no. And that was, that may have been one, my biggest takeaway. And it was, I probably mentioned it on the last show after they, got through the first 2 rounds that, Charleston down 19-13 earlier, they go into the media timeout, they kind of settle themselves and, basically run away from Charleston for the next 20 game minutes and pull away, score 100 points. Grand Canyon, 58-55 down late. It's 6 minutes left. Mo Diabate comes through, 9 straight points, lifts them to a 72-61 win. Same thing with North Carolina. Like, North Carolina found ways to, it always seemed like North Carolina was at least like on the verge of taking over the game. Mm-hmm. And Alabama just kind of never let them. Like, they went up, I forget exactly by how many, they were up 10, I think it was early. 19-9, believe was the score. They went on a couple of small runs here and there, but then, there's Mark Sears hitting a 3. There's Rylan Griffin hitting a 3. Late in that game, right? I think 75-70 and 85-82, North Carolina had leads. Grant Nelson came through, right? Scored 15 of Alabama's final 22 points in that game, finished with a few blocks, had a double-double. Just tremendous, tremendous stuff. And then Clemson, 26-13 early. It's like, okay, like this, we'll see what happens, right? They settle themselves again, have the lead by halftime, right? 22-6 run to end the first half. And then, that they're up by 3 and they didn't shoot well, right? And then they shot well. And that was like, whoa, okay, like this is impressive, right? And like, it's, thank goodness they shot well, because Clemson also shot well. And you mentioned, back-to-back answers by 3. Like, they made 5 straight 3-pointers at one time. Like, they had a stretch where they hit 11 of 9 shots and 6 or 7 of them were 3-pointers. Like, it was, like, it's, and I think to your point about how, like, the defense didn't need to be good. It didn't need to be elite. It didn't need to be the defense that won them the SEC regular season and tournament titles 2 of the last 3 years. With as good as the offense is, like, the defense just needed to be competent, right? Like, it couldn't be an outside the top 100 defense by KenPom. It had to be, preferably somewhere up around that 50 range or so. But, if the offense was on, they could probably get away with, top 70 defense or something like that. That's right. More or less what they got. Like, I know UNC and Clemson are pretty good offensively, or at least UNC's good offensively. Clemson just kind of matches up well with what PJ Hall does. But the defense did enough. Like, like Armando Bacot from UNC and RJ Davis. Bacot still, I think, finished with 19 points, but he needed 18 shots to get there. Like, that was some of the best defense that, combination of Nelson and Pringle had shown all season. RJ Davis, like, I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways, and maybe this is kind of leading into, what did you like about the way they played these 2 games? But Rylan Griffin, man, like, that dude's an elite defender. Like, he frustrated RJ Davis to no end that entire game. He finished 4 of 20 shooting, 0 of 9 from 3. Like, a lot of that is because Rylan Griffin's like me. Like, I got this guy, I'm going to guard him. Just really impressive stuff. And then against Clemson, like, same thing. Like, they were able to frustrate PJ Hall, who, 20 points in the win in November, 14 points, and he fouled out with like 5 minutes to go in this game. Like, they just, it's still not an elite defense. Like, I think there are a lot of moments where it's not even a good defense, but it's been good enough. And it was good enough to get them through the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. And, I think, to your point, we identified that pretty early in the season that, like, hey, doesn't need to be elite, doesn't need to be even good most of the time. It just needs to be good in long enough stretches for the offense to do its thing. And we saw that. Like this, I would argue that this past weekend, maybe not the best total version, but they're playing the way that they need to play for this version of this Alabama team to advance. And, here they are, one of the last 4 teams standings. I don't know. Like, it was a lot about this weekend was really, really impressive because you watch the game, they're fun games, they're going back and forth. Next thing you look up and it's like, they got a shot to win this. And they won them both. And it was, I don't know, it was really, really impressive. And it's been a fun team to watch over the last couple weeks, but especially this weekend, I felt like they, Nate Oates' term for Jaron Stevenson, who's a true freshman, team grew up quite a bit. Like, they just, they're figuring out ways to win games, which is what you need to do. It's what tough teams do at this time of the year.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's when Clemson was leading 26-13, if you told me that Alabama would be the first team to get to 30 in that situation, I'd be like, what? I mean, and that changed the game because, and honestly, this was probably true in at least 3, maybe 4 of the games that they've played, where the first 5 minutes did not define the game. Like, you watch the first 4 or 5 minutes of all those games, and you probably think a different result than what actually happened. Like, Charleston was leading. You're like, all right, like, Alabama's playing like they played against Florida, and at the end of the regular season, they're going to be one and done. Nope. Like, change that. Grand Canyon, I kind of forget how the beginning of that game went. It was very scrappy, which maybe was accurate.
No pun intended, but that game against Grand Canyon was every bit of a rock fight.
But I think Alabama was actually leading a little bit more comfortably early in the game, if I remember correctly. And then it kind of got really tight towards the end. And then the North Carolina game, North Carolina comes out and is making their shots, and they look great. And you're like, all right, this is the end for Alabama. And then it wasn't. Clemson, they come out, they're making their shots. They're, pounding them down low. And it just looks like Clemson's going to do what they did before. Nope. Like, these first few minutes, even going back to the Florida game, it was the SEC tournament one or the one that was in Florida. I think it was the SEC tournament one. Alabama comes out with all this energy, and they look great in the first 5 minutes, and the rest of the game's totally different. So it's almost like when I sit down to watch an Alabama basketball game, and this will be true on Saturday, you watch the first 4 minutes, and you're like, well, the opposite of what I just watched is what's going to happen in the rest of this game, which I think is a testament, at least recently, for Alabama to them just being able to change it, and being able to bear down and say, whatever we're not doing right early in the game, we need to fix and make the adjustments from the coaching staff and the players and all that. So, that's been impressive to me, kind of, to watch these last 4 games.
Yeah, I think it seems like, the first 8 minutes or so, it's almost like they're just trying to, like, Alabama specifically, just trying to, like, feel out the opponent. Like, hey, like, what are they doing? Where do we need to make the adjustments? They're just kind of playing. And, between the under 8 and the under 4 timeouts in the first half, like, that's kind of where it's like, okay, what kind of responses are they going to make? What kind of adjustments are they going to make? And then that really kind of sets the tone for the rest of the game, right? Because you look at, that UNC game. UNC's up at the under 16 and the under 12, right? 12-7 at the under 16. And then they're up 21-17. But then by the under 8, like, it's 32-31 Alabama, right? And then next thing you know, they're going back and forth virtually the rest of the way. Same thing with Clemson, like, kind of even through the first 2 media timeouts. Clemson starts to surge, but then again, like you mentioned, like, after it's 26-13, Alabama beats them to 30. Like, that's, I think what were some of the stats that I was throwing out there? They started 5 of 25 or something from the floor, and then finished like 24 of 37. They started 1 of 13 from 3, finished, 10 of 15 in the second half. Like, just tremendous stuff, like, tremendous answers, tremendous adjustments to, okay, this is what they're doing. This is what we need to do. And, they were able to find answers. Like, it was just all around super impressive. There was a lot to like about the way Alabama played through the first, these last 2 games. I keep saying first, these last 2 games. What was one thing that like really stood out to you, something that you really liked? I know we've talked about the heroes at different games. I know we've talked about obviously the ability to adjust, the ability to answer, the ability to keep playing through some early mistakes or slow starts and whatnot. But what was when you think of the way that they were able to beat UNC and Clemson, what was one thing that you really liked?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's two different games. But I think the ability, and we've talked about it all year, like the big men were going to be the issue for Alabama. Like we figured that was what was going to knock them out. You play a team like that has a Baycott, that has a PJ Hall. I mean, could be true with Donovan Clingan. We'll see. But that was kind of the kryptonite for this Alabama team. And we talked about it all year, like how much they missed Charles Bediako, how much they needed the rim protector. And it was just kind of a thing where I think a lot of people assumed, even kind of the most optimistic minded people assumed that Alabama just wouldn't have that player to stop that sort of big man on the other side. Well, Nick Pringle looked pretty good about doing that. I mean, you can talk about some of his missed shots at the rim and all that, but I was up close, for this Clemson game against PJ Hall and Ian Shiflin, and Pringle was doing work against him. I mean, he's bigger, probably than both of them, taller at least. Shiflin is a little bit thicker, but like he went toe to toe and did everything he needed to do defensively when he was in the game. And then it was the North Carolina game where he went out, kind of hurt himself a little bit.
Bruce Teal.
Yeah. And then North Carolina came in, and I think it was like 2 possessions in a row where they just kind of blew right by the defense. And then Pringle came back into the game and they were fine after that. So you can kind of tell how much of a difference he was making. And even Nate said it, I think last week, that like their defensive issues were not just about the rim protection issue, not just about Charles Bediako. I think they have the players. It's just getting them to do what they need to do. And, for a stretch of early in the season, it was Muhammad Wage who was actually doing that pretty well for him. And then Pringle does, I mean, it's just a roller coaster of a season for him with his suspensions, and then even going into the Spokane thing, the personal issues and traveling late and all that. And then plays 4 games of his life hurt that have been great for him. And we have, Nate talking about how great of a leader he is. It's just, that's what they needed. So, they had it on their roster. Like, I don't know if it was just an issue of losing Charles Bediako. They just need to get it out of their players. And they certainly got it out of Nick Pringle.
Yeah, no, I agree. He was tremendous against UNC. He was, only 2 points, but, 9 rebounds, a little bit of foul trouble, had even 3 assists, played 20 good minutes, even despite a bruised heel. I know Nelson was the superhero of that game, but kind of quietly, Pringle made life hard on Armando Bacot, which I think was just, you knew he was going to get his points, but could you frustrate him? Could you make him earn it? Like that was more or less the game plan. And then against Clemson, right? Double-double, second double-double in 6 NCAA tournament games for Pringle. And, he was magnificent. Like I know he missed a few, easy ones early in the game, but I think at one point he had a stretch of 8 straight points late in the second half to help Alabama kind of keep Clemson at bay a little bit. Struggled with some free throws early, was able to hit a lot of his free throws late. Just, a lot of hustle stuff, a lot of just really, really good little nitty gritty, dirty stuff. I agree. Pringle was really great. The one thing that I really liked that it seemed like there's been a different dude or a different couple of dudes every single game, right? Like Mo D and Mo Dub in game 1, Mo Diabate again in game 2, Grant Nelson, obviously against North Carolina. And then, Jaron Stevenson and Nick Pringle in, against Clemson. But I tell you what, the why they've been able to have, or at least like one reason why that, you need your stars to kind of hold serve a little bit if you're going to have a different like hero, so to speak, every single game, right? Like you need a guy like Mark Sears to continue to drop his 20 points a game. You need a guy like Rylan Griffin, who has been tremendous defensively, but it's like he's also like a sharpshooter, right? Like he's 11 of 22 from 3 in the NCAA tournament over 4 games, right? He's shooting north of 50% from the floor in general. Like and you can tell he's playing with a lot more confidence. Like he knows he's kind of that dude on the defensive perimeter. I guess when you frustrate an All-American and RJ Davis, like that's going to give you a lot of confidence moving forward. But he just seems to be playing with a lot more confidence, and you can see that. Mark Sears, obviously, like when his shots are hitting, like I don't know that there's anybody better from deep. Like he shot one from the logo against Clemson as part of that like 5 straight 3-point makes in the second half, and it's just like, okay, like if you're Clemson, like you just kind of have to throw your hands up, and it's like what are we supposed to do with this? But like they need to, a lot of those guys need to play steady and hold serve, to kind of allow for some of these heroes to shine for a little bit. And I felt like a lot of their guys did that, right? Like Aaron Estrada maybe took a few more shots, or, maybe not as many good shots as I would have probably preferred, right? Sometimes he takes 13 shots to get to his 10 points, but, he still is able to get to his 10 points. He's still able to get to, his 10, 8, and 5 or 10, 8, and 6. Like he just continues to not necessarily hunt triple doubles, but he fills the stat line, right? Those guys just being, seemingly consistent night in and night out. And then you get the push from Grant Nelson against UNC. And then you get the push from Jaron Stevenson and Pringle against Clemson. Like that's, I don't know. Like they seem to have some consistency underneath these superstars that seem to shine every single game. And, that's what they needed, right? Like that's what they needed to get through the second weekend. That's what they needed to get to the second weekend in general. And it was really, really good to see a lot of those guys just, you knew what you were getting in Mark Sears. You knew what you were getting in Rylan Griffin after a while. You know what you're going to get in Aaron Estrada, and then Grant Nelson comes in and does his thing. And then Jaron Stevenson decides to go, unconscious from deep. Like I don't know, like there was underneath the superstars, there's, those steady, guys that just continue to bring it night in and night out. And that was good to see.
That's kind of what this team is. I mean, it's something too, where even, Nate was on College Game Day yesterday, and he said, of the 3 Sweet 16 teams that they've had, this was probably the least likely one to make a Final Four. I mean, just obviously basically from their seed, they're the 4 seed versus a 1 seed that they had last year versus the 2 seed they had 3 years ago. But there's not the NBA type talent that maybe those teams had. I mean, Herb Jones, I think we knew he was going to be an NBA player when he was, playing that last season. He was the SEC Player of the Year. He was a second-round pick, but he's, if you do that draft over, he's probably a top 10 pick. He's been a very good NBA player. And then Brandon Miller, is a top 3 NBA draft pick. And everybody knew that last year. That wasn't a surprise. That was kind of from the jump. So this team doesn't really have that. I mean, Mark Sears is going to get a shot in the NBA. Second round pick, I think is probably, where he's at. He's undersized. He's not that sort of Herb Jones or Brandon Miller type of player. Grant Nelson does have the size, but the refinement is probably not there with him. So I think there was aspirations maybe of getting him up into the first round. I think that's why he came back to school, because he was a projected second round pick last year. I don't know if that has happened where he's moved from the second to the first. I think he's still probably a second round pick if he is drafted. It's not a team that has that sort of NBA player. I mean, Rylan Griffin, I think, has some potential. And he's really shown it recently too. So that it's not going to happen this year, but I think another year of college, like you could be talking about him as a draft pick. Jaron Stevenson probably has potential down the road, but it didn't happen this year like it did with Noah Clowney last year. So there may not be a guy that's drafted from this Alabama team. Like that's within the realm of possibility. There probably will be. But that's different from the other 2 teams, but they have those guys that are just a little bit, the blue collar thing, like probably applies to them. Aaron Estrada's talked about it. Like everybody doubted me. He went to St. Peter's and Oregon and Hofstra and he's bounced around. Mark Sears was a mid-major player. Grant Nelson was a mid-major player. Chip on the shoulder type of guys. And they've kind of fed off the doubt. Finally, I mean, the doubt has been there all year. Like, it's not like there's a breaking news story about their defense. Like people have questioned that all year, but they've been watching videos of what people have said about them, and Charles Barkley calling them frail and all that stuff. So, and it's
channeled.
Right.
Nato's channeled his inner Nick Saban and called out the naysayers after they beat Clemson for his style of offense.
Right. Again, it's been there the entire year, but for some reason, this team seems to have responded to it better now. And so that's kind of that underdog mentality, I think, is maybe what this team has a little bit more than what they had last year, where they're more of the front runner. they probably had it 3 years ago, I would say, because that was the beginning. Nobody really saw Alabama coming at that point. So, um, there's different qualities of this team, which is good. And they don't have necessarily the top level talent, but that second level talent is deep. And you can go, Griffin, Wrightsell, Estrada, Sears, Nelson, Stevenson, Pringle on a good night. Like, they have that second level player, pretty well stocked. Even if they don't necessarily have that, once in a generation type of player like they did last year.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know. I feel like that's come to the forefront, especially, last weekend, but I mean, really all tournament long. Hard to not like anything about a Final Four run, but was there anything that stood out this past weekend as something that gives you pause, gives you worry? We're going to touch on UConn here in a minute and how that, that matchup stylistically seems like UConn is just the heavy favorite. Obviously, the betting lines already came out, but looking back at the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, was there anything that still kind of, they were able to overcome that, on their way to the Final Four? What did you not like about the way they played?
So, I mean, if you ask North Carolina, and I asked RJ Davis about Rylan Griffin's defense, and I don't want to say brushed off Rylan Griffin. He kind of gave him a passing, he's a good long player, blah, blah, blah. And then really focused more on the fact that he thought he missed shots that he should have made. Same thing with Withers, the North Carolina player who missed that three with like a minute left. And it was open, like a wide open three, just missed. Would have been probably a different result, or maybe a different result if he had hit it. North Carolina was really under the impression that they shot themselves in the foot with their shooting in the second half of the game. And if they were shooting as they normally did, then they would have won that game. Clemson, I think, is less equipped to play that type of game, but they were missing open shots as well. They were taking some weird shots. Ian Shiflin taking threes is not how they're going to win. But it's still like you hit your shots, you win. You don't hit your shots, you lose. Like, there's still some element of that. And, UConn is probably a lot less apt to be missing the shots that North Carolina missed in the second half. They're certainly less apt to be missing the shots that Clemson was missing. So that's where I would have pause. If you play the exact same level of defense and then your shooters on the other side are hitting shots because you have Tristan Newton and you have the other UConn shooter whose name is escaping me off the top of my head, then they could simply be hot, and it doesn't matter how good defense you're playing. Like, the other team can't miss, which is probably how Clemson felt, with Alabama. So, that, again, I don't know if there's like something you can do about that, but I don't know if like North Carolina is completely lying or completely wrong about, we just missed our shots that night. And if you play that game 10 times, if North Carolina hits more of those shots, does North Carolina win? Like, probably at least a few times. So that's, it's kind of the nature of March is what I'm getting into, is you just don't know. And I think a lot of things have gone right for Alabama in these first 4 games, but that doesn't guarantee they're going to continue to go right, and they could go wrong for Alabama. And it's just kind of how it would go. Trying to
Cam Spencer.
What's that?
Said, was it Cam Spencer?
Cam Spencer, yeah, that's who it is. And he's shooting 44% on a year from 3. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to have the same issues that Clemson shooters had. Maybe he does, but that's between Spencer and Newton and Alex Carabin shooting 38%. Like, you're going to need 2 of them to have an off night and play really good defense against them to kind of force that.
Yeah, I think the one thing that bothered me, and this kind of leads into kind of like you were, into the Final Four matchup against UConn. Hit your freaking layups, man. Like, they just, you can't, you got to take advantage of the gimmies. Like, if you can, I think it was Scott Van Pelt said one time, if you can do the hard stuff well, don't screw up the easy stuff. And Alabama, more so against Clemson than against UNC, but 9 of 20 on layups against Clemson, 15 of 29 on layups against UNC. So what's that? 24 of 49 on layups through the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. Like, you You got to hit the easy stuff if you want to beat UConn. Like, you have to take advantage of the easy stuff. You got to take advantage of the stuff that's right in front of you, because if not, UConn's a team that's going to make you pay. And for a while, North Carolina was making them pay. For a while, Clemson was making them pay, because how many of those layups were missed in the first half when Alabama went down 26-13? Like, it's just, I don't know. Like, at some point during, Saturday's Elite Eight game against Clemson, I was just like, you're missing too many layups. You had the comment like, Easter's this weekend, but they're missing the bunnies. Like, that's, you gotta hit the easy stuff. And for a while during that game on Saturday, I was like, if Alabama ultimately loses this game, it's probably because they're going to miss too many layups. Like, for a while they went like 2 of 13 or something like that, or 2 of 15. Like, it was rough. It was really rough. And just looking at the numbers as a whole, like, not great. And like, oh, by the way, you probably have the hottest big man in the tournament, not named Zach Edey, and Donovan Clingan, who's going to be guarding the rim on Saturday in Phoenix. Like, the easy ones are not going to be there very often, is what I'm getting at. And so if you're missing the easy ones against a Clemson who has good big men, and against North Carolina, who again has good big men, what are you going to do when the easy ones aren't going to be as frequent against a great big man in Donovan Clingan? Like, that really bothered me. I felt like if they'd hit their layups in the first half, they would not have, one, gone down by 13 against Clemson, and two, could have been up by as many as 10, if not more. Like, I don't know. Like, that, you got to take advantage of the easy stuff. I know Alabama loves to rain threes. They've got a lot of sharp shooters. They've been shooting it very well throughout the course of the tournament. They're going to probably lean back into that against UConn in some capacity. Just because matchup wise, it makes a lot of sense. And two, that's Alabama's obvious strength. But man, when you get those opportunities at the rim, you better take advantage, because if you're going to compete with UConn, and I say compete, like, they beat their first 4 teams by an average of 28 points per game. Like, when I say compete, like, if you want to stay within striking distance of this Husky team, like, you have got to make the easy stuff. Alabama didn't always do that in the last 2 games. And that's clearly, you can tell by my voice, a little frustrated by that.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, it's right. I mean, if that game went differently, the Clemson game in the second half, I think the biggest story would have been Alabama loses because they can't make a layup. Like, who saw that? So yeah, I mean, sometimes it masks stuff like that when you win a game and hit your shots from deep, which they did. It kind of masks some of the stuff underneath there. So yeah, it's a problem. It tends to just come up at random times for this team. I remember there was a game, I think it was at Oklahoma, that they played 2 years ago, and they were just absolutely terrible at the rim. And you're asking Nate Oates after the game, like, why? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, it's like, we can practice it. We can, do the George Mikan drill until our pants fall off. But like, you go out there in a game and sometimes guys just forget how to do it. And yeah, I mean, that's obviously, you can't have that happen against UConn in the Final Four, but for some reason, sometimes those things are just very isolated into one game, and you come out the next game and it's not a problem anymore.
Alabama better hope it's not a problem on Saturday night against University of Connecticut, the Huskies, defending NCAA champs and the #1 overall seed in this year's tournament. They've won 66 games the last 2 seasons under Dan Hurley. They are seeking what would be, I believe, their 6th national championship if they're able to pull it off here. They have been to the Final Four 6 times. They're 10-1 overall in Final Four games between, since 1999, I believe it was. Jim Calhoun, now Hurley. There was a coach in between there. It's escaping me right now. This is really bad podcasting. But they just, when I think Blue Bloods, I think Duke, I think North Carolina, Villanova more recently. UConn just routinely is there all the time. And this year's team is no different. They, 35-3, I think they are this year. An absolute buzzsaw of a team. They have cruised their way through the tournament against arguably the toughest region, right? Like, they beat San Diego State in the Sweet 16. They beat Illinois handily in the Elite Eight. They blazed through the Big East. Like, what can Alabama do, man? Like, I hate to say that this is an impossible mountain to climb, because I don't believe it's impossible, but holy cow, this is a very steep mountain for Alabama to climb. What's the path to victory here as you see it right now on Monday?
They got to bring Kevin Ollie back. Kevin Ollie is the coach that was escaping you. Back when UConn was briefly in the the American Conference, which was kind of a weird symptom of conference realignment for a few years there. And that was the vestiges of the old Big East, and they were playing Tulane and SMU. And I think there was a point where UConn's like, what the heck are we doing here? And they went back to the Big East, and they got Danny Hurley, and they've been, steadily improving ever since. They were great last year, won a national title. They're probably even better this year. They're number one in the country in offense right now on Ken Palm. Alabama's number 3, Purdue's number 2. So you have the top 3 offenses in the Final Four.
But what's their defensive rating? I have it here in front of me.
Yes, the defense is where UConn is significantly better than Alabama. UConn's number 4 in defense. Purdue's number 16. Alabama's number 104. And NC State, just the little engine that could, 40th in offense, 45th in defense. So kind of good at both, but not elite at both. So, this is a historically good UConn team. Assuming is just kind of the word I will use there, because I think they're certainly the favorites and capable of doing it, that they win their next 2 games. They win a back-to-back national title. I think they'll certainly go down as one of the best teams ever in college basketball. And it's been quiet. It's not like it's been talked about necessarily. They don't really have that star. I don't know if Tristan Newton's a very, very good player, but it's not like they have LeBron James on their team and everybody's kind of watching that. So,
they've got 4 dudes that average, double figures, or maybe 5 dudes that average double figures per game. But none of them, I occasionally one will have a game where they blow up and it's like, oh my goodness, look at that guy go. But right. Just very, very efficient, very quiet, very subtle. This is a team that just goes about their business and just beats the brakes off people, man.
Yeah. It's not Syracuse with Carmelo Anthony or, some of these great teams of the past. And Syracuse went 30-5 that year. Won a national title with Carmelo. They don't have that Carmelo guy necessarily, but it's a really deep team, a really good team. What does Alabama need to do? I think, getting Latrell Wrightso back will help. Getting Nick Pringle healthy will help. You go in with full strength, and you just got to hope that to begin with that you at least 3 of your shooters have really good nights, like Sears, Nelson, or Sears, Ryland, Estrada, or Sears, Ryland, Wrightso. Like, you got to have, I think, 3 of those guys be able to shoot the ball. If you're just doing 1 or 2 who's having a good night, that's not going to work. You need your post presence. You need Pringle and Nelson to do what they did against PJ Hall, but do it against Donovan Clingan, who's, I think Nate Oates was talking yesterday, is the 2nd rated big man in the country behind Zach Edey. So you need a combination of that. You got to stay 1 step ahead coaching wise in terms of what you're doing schematically on both ends of the floor. I think you got to continue to cut down on their turnovers, which is something they've done really well lately, kind of quietly, because that was an issue throughout February, is how sloppy they were. I think even the North Carolina game, they had kind of a stretch of like 3 or 4 pretty early. And then there was a stretch of like 10 or 12 minutes where they had none. And the Clemson game, they were pretty, safe control with the ball as well. So you continue to do that. You get a rebound, which they've done pretty well lately. You just got to combine all those things. And again, withstand the runs from UConn, withstand the times in the game where things aren't looking so good. Now, if you give up a 30-0 run, you're probably screwed. Let's put it that way. Like that was crazy. And we were all talking, and that game was pretty close in the first half, and UConn's like, what's happening here? And then I think we
just woke up and decided to remember that they play basketball.
Put the foot on the throat, and then to do it for 30 straight points is just insane. I can't remember ever seeing that before. So
absurd.
That's what you're up against. But I don't think it's like, it's not miracle on ice sort of upset if Alabama wins. But it's going to take a lot more than what they've done really the last 4 games.
I think the way I rationalized it in my head, and this is before Alabama played North Carolina, was that they needed a little bit from everybody. And I think that's, you were alluding to it, that they need that again, but they're going to need a little bit more from everybody if they want to give themselves a shot here. Like Mark Sears needs to hit his 24 points that he's been averaging over the tournament. Rylan Griffin needs to be good defensively, continue to be a sharp shooter. Aaron Estrada can't take his 13 shots to get to his 14 points. You're probably going to need Jaron Stevenson to hit some threes. You're probably going to need Grant Nelson to stay out of foul trouble. You're probably going to need Nick Pringle to make life as frustrating on Klingon as you probably can. And just hope you hit your shots, right? Like this is, and the other thing that maybe comes to mind, I'm curious your thoughts on this too, as we kind of wrap up the show here. This is not a UConn team that is particularly lethal from deep. They have guys who can shoot it, right? We talked about Newton. We talked about Cam Spencer. Those guys at any point in time can pop off for 20, 25, 30 points even. I think Newton has hit at some points this year. They're more of a team that seems to go inside a lot more, and they're incredibly efficient at doing it. Obviously, Klingon is a huge part of that, right? He's shooting 64% from the floor, but you look up and down the roster like Newton, 41%, Spencer, 48%, Caravan, forward, 50% from the floor. They got guys coming off the bench that are shooting 47, 48, 72%. Sam Johnson, the forward, right? He only plays 16 minutes a game, like just incredibly efficient stuff. Like is obvious. It like obviously got teams with talented big men, teams that can go inside have been destructive against this Alabama team. And I know they played really well against PJ Hall and Armando Bacot, but this just seems like a different type of challenge. Like how much of it is UConn just, even if Alabama's hitting their shots, how much is it just UConn maybe just staying the course and continuing to go inside to their big guys and just, you know, playing a little bit more efficiently, even if Alabama is able to hit their shots?
Yeah. I mean, that's still probably UConn's best path to victory is to try to beat Alabama inside. And that's what they did last season, the 2022 game that they played in the Phil Knight tournament. It wasn't Klingon, I don't think. I forget how much he played in that game. It was more Sonogo was their big guy that really gave Alabama some problems in that 2022 game. And I don't know if they're necessarily better than they were down low, Alabama, than they were back then. So was Klingon. Yeah, he came off the bench. Klingon played 11 minutes, scored 4 points, 5 rebounds in that game. It was Sonogo who played 28 minutes, scored 25 points, 2 blocks, only 4 rebounds, but 9 of 16. And he was really giving them some issues. And UConn kind of ran away with that game. It wasn't too close. So that's the only time that they played, you know, under Nate Oates, Danny Hurley. I don't know how much the film of that game will be relevant. There's only 3 Alabama players left. And UConn's roster is a little bit more consistent with that. But, you know, it's a new ball game. That's what Alabama needs to hope is just fresh, clean slate. And what UConn's done so far this year doesn't matter. What Alabama's done so far doesn't matter. And you go out there and you win a game in 40 minutes.
No, that's true. Nate Oates and company have, you know, a few more days here to figure out a game plan and 40 minutes on Saturday night to figure out who's going to go play for a national championship. We're going to have a lot more coverage coming later this week, some stories. I'll be down in Phoenix starting Wednesday, writing some stuff. We got a lot of media availability with a lot of these guys, both Alabama, UConn, as well as Purdue and NC State on the other side of the bracket. So we'll have a lot of content coming your way on Bama 247 and 247 Sports, but that's all we've got today. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Mike, I appreciate you as always for joining me. We'll be back hopefully sometime later this week before the game. Maybe kind of weave in some football and basketball since I know we've got 2 weeks left of spring football. Haven't really touched on them a little bit because this Alabama team's been doing the dang thing in the big dance, but we'll see what we can do later this week on the show. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. Believe we're running a new 50% off annual VIP special for those
60.
of you. 60% off, even better, right? That's only like $43 a year in honor of Alabama making the Final Four as well as spring football on its final 2 weeks for this spring. So be sure to take advantage of that, especially if you're an Alabama fan. Again, thank you, Mike, and we appreciate you guys always for listening. We will talk to you all again soon.